The following presentation was given at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Tupelo in Tupelo, Mississippi. All are welcome to join us on Sundays at 11 a.m. at 1301 Marshall Street in Tupelo.
So I just had the great joy of singing along as I snuck up behind Quinoa and Ronaldo. I love that song, Runaway Train. I'm going to refer to it a little bit here today. One time, I had a really bad day. I woke up, I took my kids to their schools, and arrived at Manna House with my infant daughter. Manna House is a place of hospitality for people experiencing homelessness and poverty. So my infant daughter was, maybe 6 months old. She was strapped to my chest in a baby sling. I had just set my things down. We did opening prayer, and I walked over to say good morning to one of our regular guests. All of a sudden, I felt something warm, and I heard a dripping sound. My baby had peed down her leg, out her diaper, onto me, onto the floor. Peals of laughter surrounded me from all the guests who were just highly amused by this situation. And I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I excused myself. I went back to get my things. I got in my car. I drove home to get us both changed. And I got myself cleaned up. I got her cleaned up. She immediately threw up all over me. I cleaned up the bed, my jacket, changed her clothes again, and tried to get out the door. On the way out the door, she pooped. So I stop and fix that. And those of us who are parents, this may be familiar. And then I finally get her in her car seat, and I turn on the engine when I realize the car is out of gas. And so I drove to the gas station, and when I got there, both my debit cards were declined. Okay, I drove home. I knew where I had a $50 bill hidden that was a gift from my mom. I pulled that out. I go back out to the gas station. The cashier says, "Ma'am, we can't cash a bill that high." And I went, oh, what am I going to do? My car's out of gas. This is what I have right now. And she said, well, if you wait till somebody comes and buys a lottery ticket, I got you. Okay, all right, I can do that. And that's exactly what happened within like 5 minutes. And then I was able to pump some gas. I drove back to Manna House. I get out of the car with my baby, walk into the building, and begin to try to find my way to where I set my diaper bag down, and I tripped over a box of toothpaste samples, and I fell on my behind. It was not dignified, but my daughter wasn't hurt because she was strapped on right here. And I'm really glad she wasn't hurt because that would have made things so much worse. After I got through laughing at myself, I went out on the porch to talk to people. And my friend was there, and he said, "What's the matter, Miss Edie? You look upset." I proceeded to tell him about my horrible, awful day. And as I finished telling my story, though, the irony of it began to hit me. And I began to feel ashamed. I realized it was ridiculous for me to consider this a bad day. When my friend sleeps under a bridge, he has no home, no car, he walks miles every day to get food. His bad days are so much worse than any so-called bad day I could ever have. And so I realized this, and I apologized to him, and he grinned at me, and he said, "Oh, it ain't nothing. I hope your day gets better." Since 2015, I've been doing unpaid ministry with people experiencing homelessness and poverty. It's been enormously fulfilling, but also quite challenging financially, and I can never repay my spouse for having supported me all these years as I did this important work. In that time, I have met many folks who might be able to relate to the song we just heard, Runaway Train. I know that I certainly did as a teenager. In 1992, when that song came out, I had just moved out of my mom's house, and I was working in a restaurant for $2.13 an hour. And I was riding a bicycle to work and living in a trailer. And I was on food stamps and ate a lot of ramen noodles that year. But I wasn't homeless. I had a home. And the people that I've met in the work that I've done over the past 5 years, most of them are not as lucky as I was. Almost every single person that I've met has some kind of tragic story in their past. My mentor, Dr. Peter Gatke, warned me that some of their life stories would break my heart. And as time has gone on, he's been proven right. One woman told me about how her husband was violently abusive. She had no family in town, no money that she could control, and so she turned to prostitution and drugs and life on the streets. And she told me that she sent her teenage child to live with a family in another city, that he will have all the benefits that she actually had growing up: private schools, good clothes, social connections, but for complex reasons, this lady has nowhere to go. Her family is not able to help her, and those of us who know about addiction know that eventually you do wear your family out if it goes on long enough. The thing that gets me is that she's roughly my age, but you would never guess if you saw us side by side that we were both born in 1972. Because as I've known her for the past 5 years, I've watched the toll that homelessness takes on her health, and it's serious. Research has shown that people who are unhoused die an average of 3 decades sooner than people who have housing. So it's a stark difference. A lot of the folks I've met have been in deep despair, like in the song, and they don't see any way out. And people can be very reserved emotionally. I believe perhaps life might have taught them to keep to themselves and not to grant trust easily. It's almost as if, lacking stable walls that are physical, they have to build up emotional walls to protect themselves. And every once in a while, these folks extend their trust to me and they let me in, and it's such a gift. In organizing folks to enter our free local shelter system, one of my tasks entailed asking a series of questions like, what's your medical history? Do you take any medication? What's your legal name? And can you give us an emergency contact? Just in case. And what shocked and saddened me 5 years ago and still disturbs me now is that most of these folks had nobody we could list. Nobody that they felt cared enough about them to be an emergency contact. I think that's the ultimate tragedy of being unhoused, is that people feel like nobody cares about them. They feel unworthy, unloved, invisible, ignored. And our society tends to reinforce those beliefs. Just like in the quote from Kurt Vonnegut, poverty is seen as a kind of moral failure, but I think it's systemic. It's systemic violence, it's structural, and it's a deliberate part of capitalism. Someone who gets very little has to make widgets. Somebody who gets a little more buys and sells the widgets. And someone at the top has a vacation home in an exotic place, who flies first class and has a lavish lifestyle. There are people exploited by the system, and there are those that benefit from it. So in all of this, I keep thinking about the first principle, our inherent worth and dignity. And I don't believe that anybody's disposable. I believe that every single person I've met and everybody in this room, everybody on earth, is deserving of love and shelter and kindness, everything that we are imbued with according to our Creator. And so I think everybody's worthy of being treated with respect. And I think one of the things we can do is we can advocate for housing for all people, not just folks with good credit ratings or good jobs. And everybody deserves shelter. One of the ways this can happen starts with a concept that is called housing first. Housing first is where we get people into housing, and then later on we worry about whether they've got an addiction or an illness or any kind of problem that could be solved or addressed, instead of going about it the other way. There are still programs in Memphis and all over the country that insist you have to be clean first, you have to be sober, you have to be well, and then they give housing. And I think that's kind of backwards. I think it's only after people get housing that they can stabilize and begin to get better. Because in many cases, all of those things I just outlined get dramatically worse on the streets when you don't get enough sleep and you don't know where you're going to be and you don't know where your next meal might be coming from. I think if they get housing, they can begin to heal. There is a shelter in my hometown, which I will not name, but I think that their theology is kind of cruel. Their theology is that if people accept Jesus, they will clean themselves up and get good jobs and get off the streets. And Jesus is the key. And so they charge people a $7 fee to use the shelter every night. And they require every person entering to attend a prayer service that is Christian in nature in order to eat the dinner. I think that's cruel, honestly. And the solution to homelessness is really quite simple. Just give people homes. Not programs picking up trash. Just give them a home. I remember this thing that someone once said about welcoming the stranger when I think about my friends on the streets. So when we see folks out there with their little cardboard sign, they might be trying to raise money to get into the shelter. And I think we live out our belief in the first principle, if we have a little change, to share it with people. And if we don't have it to give, what we can do is just offer a smile and say hello. The kindness of a few words and the acknowledgement of our shared humanity is one of the least things that we can do. And I think it's a beautiful gesture. Before I began this path, I used to be self-conscious and look down. I didn't know what to say. It felt awkward. And I felt like I didn't know what to do. I now know that we're all in this together and that it's okay to feel awkward, and it's still okay to reach in your pocket and give a little money if you can. People who don't have a roof over their heads are exactly like me. That's something that I've found out over the last 5 years. Any of us could be a relationship difficulty or a job loss or a health problem away from losing our housing ourselves. I believe that you and I can make a difference, that those of us who are religious people are called by God and asked to serve humanity, to help folks who might not have what we have. Richly connected, loving bonds with each other should be our birthright, not something extra. It's a gift from the divine, and it's what we all deserve. So giving a few hours of your time once in a while at a shelter or a soup kitchen would be an incredible gift to offer our fellow human beings. My friends from the margin of society are teaching me how to be a better person. We as human beings, as religious people, I believe that we are called to aid those who lack the basic necessities of life. For we're all one human family. We aren't separate. Our seventh principle teaches us about the interconnected web of life, and I think that's part of it right there. Our faith also calls us to subvert power structures and to radically reimagine what a world might look like if everybody had what they needed, and how beautiful that would be. I believe the universe calls us to be radical like Jesus, that homeless wanderer who preached a kind of equality that we may all aspire to. Our siblings on the streets are equally deserving of everything that the rest of us have. May we find a way to embrace our unhoused neighbors and accompany them on their life journeys to the best of our abilities. And maybe we'll even look into their eyes and see a neighbor, a friend, or the divine herself. Amen, and blessed be.
Thanks for listening to the UUC of Tupelo's podcast. You can find us at uuctupeloms.org, on Facebook by searching for UUC Tupelo, or contact us by email at uuctupelocom@gmail.com. That's uuctupelocom@gmail.com. The UUC of Tupelo is a welcoming congregation who accept all people, regardless of creed, color, national origin, gender, or gender identity. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast, and as you head on your way, go in peace, believe in peace, create peace.